Hey guys, it's Bullet, and today I'm finally going to show you guys how to do the custom smart link effect that you see in almost all of my edits. It's been kind of highly requested, I guess. And on Twitter I asked a while ago which scope you'd want to see. I think the BR one, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to use a Magnum because it's a lot more simpler and faster. So for the sake of the tutorial, I'll just be showing you this. It's the same principle for every single reticle or scope, so you can just apply what you're seeing here to anything else and it's going to be the same result. So first thing you need to start off is, of course, the scope that you want. In that case, it's the Magnum. And you're going to want to record one with the HUD and one without the HUD. So 1 is with the HUD for me, and 0 is without the HUD. As you can see, frame to frame, perfect. The only difference is that you don't see the smart link. And to start off, it's a lot of masking, so we're just essentially trying to trace the sort of blue lines here to get the scope that we want, and then we'll add other effects later. So I'm just going to cut to whenever this is done. I'll show you a bit of how I mask, just so that you can get a feeling for it if ever you don't really mask a lot for some reason. So to start off, what I usually do for masking when it comes to these custom smart link stuff is I create a layer or a solid, and for the sake of naming conventions, I usually keep it very simple. So I'm going to start off with inner circle, start out there. You could use a shape layer, but I always just, ever since I've used After Effects, I've always used just regular solids for masking stuff. I don't know, I find it easier once we get to this mirroring part, because all you have to do is flip the percentage here to a negative and it mirrors it perfectly. I'm not sure how to do that with shape layers since I never use them, but you can do whatever you want. Take this ellipse tool. I like turning on title action save so I can get the middle. And of course you're not going to see the mask right now since it's hidden, but we'll get to that after. So Control Shift to get a perfect circle, make it as wide as you want. I usually start with the outside ring, and now you can see what it looks like. And if you want to get a ring, what I do is I duplicate the mask, set the second one to subtract, and then I mess with the expansion. I'm gonna go with minus 3.5. Yep, there you go. And as you can see, perfect circle. And it's gonna be the same principle for everything else here, so I'll just cut to it. Okay, so now once we got all our masks done, I just wanted to show you guys this one little thing. This is why I mainly use a solid as opposed to a shape layer. When it comes to symmetrical things like this, I call this the wing details, with the plus here and this little thing and all the other details here. So whenever there's symmetry like this, all I do is take this is the layer, has half of it, I duplicate it, press S for scale, click this link to sort of unlink the scaling. So then all you have to do is flip the X to minus 100 instead of 100. And there you go, perfect symmetry. Nothing else to do. So now that we have all of our lines done, what we can do is select everything and pre-compose it. I'll just call this lines. And now what we're going to do is sort of remove the extra lines that aren't needed. So if you see here, there aren't any lines here, there aren't any lines there. And we're just going to simply remove them with subtract masks, just like we did for the rings. So it's the same principle. For example, what I do here for this is I just like that. Make sure it's aligned properly though, because you don't want to cut off more than you should. Just like that. And just make sure that your masks are set to subtract. And there you go. Now, as I said before, it's the same principle for everything else, so I'll just cut to when that's done. So once you get all your masks done with all the subtracting for the details, this is what it's mostly going to look like. For the ammo counter, I'm just going to ignore it for this tutorial, since all I do for that is I add a font on top of it and type in 12. There's no masking done for that. Sometimes I use something that's accurate, like the 12 here, or I just put some random font, like the Forerunner letters I did. And actually the very first time I used this effect, which was in Golden Hand. So next thing that I do is I add white fill to it. So if you go to Effects, Fill, I just added it on before, so you can toggle it on. And next thing we're going to do is this sort of RGB effect, this RGB split you see here. So to do that, we duplicate this 3 times. Whoops. Well, actually, before we do that, we're going to do Set Channels. Drag that onto there, or you can double click. And we're going to duplicate it 2 other times. So this is going to be lines red, lines green, and lines blue. So I'm just going to toggle it off just so that you guys can see. And also another thing, you have to set this to add, just so that the split channels overlay each other. So next, turn everything else off, keep it to red. As you can see, the color changes. So there's a red, and we're doing the same thing for green and blue. So turn off everything else except for the channel it's supposed to be. So if it's red, you want to turn everything else off except for red. If it's blue, same principle. And I screwed up, hold on. Yeah, there you go, blue. And once you turn all these on, it should be white. And all we have to do now is sort of shift it to whatever you want. So I use the arrow keys for this just to sort of fine tune it. So you just mess around with it until you get the RGB that you want. In game, it's very split like this. It's very distant from each other. I tend to keep it relatively closer than what it is in game. Again, you're the editor, so you can do whatever you want. You're not necessarily supposed to be as accurate as in game, but I try to do that. So this is like how far it is, which is something I mean, like from here it looks fine, but when you get close up it just looks weird. So play around with it, do what you want. You're the editor. For this, I'm just gonna put it a bit closer just because I like it better that way. And there you go. Now it looks a lot better. Now, of course, you can do a bunch of other things like tinting. You can add a tint wall. Actually, before I do that, pre-comp this, so then the tint gets applied to everything else. For this, I'm just going to call it lines full to get everything. And make sure you add it again once it's pre-comped. And just so you see the difference. This is with the HUD. We're going to turn that off and put without the HUD. So notice how a lot cleaner it looks without the HUD, and the main focus is just the reticle, which is a lot better. And if you want to see the difference here. Oh, and I just realized I messed up a mask here. Let's fix that. Alright, fix that little mistake. Sorry about that. Now we can go back to this. Now, where was I? Yes, the tinting. So once you pre-comp that again, have everything on one layer, you can add a tint. And of course, it removes the sort of RGB. So what I do is I tint it by about 50–60%. See how 60 looks? Yeah, that looks fine. And map white to whatever color you want. I'm always a fan of purple, so just put purple here if you want. Or whatever color, it doesn't matter. That's the whole point. You can customize it to whatever you want. So like that. And next thing I tend to put is a glow. Double click that. Oops, I don't have my layer selected. And there you go, looks a lot better. Now, if you'll notice in game, remove the reticle for a bit. There's a lot of glowing here, so that's why I put the radius a lot higher than usual. And there's also an extra step for this tutorial that I'll do for the sort of blurry here, the blurry reticle here. So as if you notice, it's essentially the same reticle, but just 3 times. So you have one very far away here, you have the middle one that you see, and then you have the close-up one that's a lot more blurry as well. So we're just gonna duplicate this multiple times and add a blur to it. So back to this. If you don't care for the RGB, I guess you can just skip that part and just have the reticle, but that's just something you can do. Personally, when you add a tint, the RGB is kind of weird. I only prefer it if it's set to white like this. Whoops. When it's white like that, I feel like it's a lot more appropriate to have RGB, but that's my opinion. You can do what you want. So let's set this to about 240, just for the glow. Got that nice haze going. Now for the rest, once we're done with this, we can duplicate it. We'll do it twice. And for this one, nowadays I do actual 3D layers, but before, this is the way I did it. So like as in, for example, with the SMG and Lotus, that was use of 3D layers. So I didn't have to scale it up and blur it. But for this, the Magnum, that's generally what I always do, because it's not really necessary to have the 3D layers. So let's scale this up to about where it was. As you can see, it's not really mapped properly, like the plus should be over here, but it doesn't matter. So now this is the close one. So now we add a camera lens blur. Double click that. And just increase the blurriness. Well, not 78, that's way too much. Like 25. Yeah, there you go. So you got that nice haze going. And another thing is, if of course this is like way too bright, so you want to turn the opacity down as well. Let's try 40. There you go, looks a lot better. And for the close-up, you scale it down. Right here should be fine. And it's the same thing. So I just copy this to, well, now I forget which layer it was. Yeah, third one. Okay. So there you go. Add the blur again. That should be blurred here. And since it's further away and in front, I usually make this a lower opacity. So let's make it like 20. Then you can barely see it. And there you go. So now, since these layers are adding on each other, you get that nice sort of glow, and it's a bit more white, but you still keep the color that you customize it to, which is always good. And now let's see what it looks like with and without the HUD. There you go. And when it comes to the reticle, like if you put the reticle over an enemy and it turns red, what I do for that is, generally by that time it's just an image, but we can sort of pre-comp and do it that way. So say for example this would be done, I would render it and then add the image into After Effects again, and then all I would have to edit is an image instead of 3 pre-comp layers, and it's a lot lighter when it's just an image as opposed to these 3 pre-comps. But it doesn't really matter, we can still do that. Smart link, and make sure to add as usual. So what I do for this is select your layer, have the ellipse tool, and mask out the reticle. And I'm pretty sure it's the whole thing. I forget if it's the inner one or just the whole thing. But Actually, I think it'll look better if we just do the inner reticle. Let's do -4. -5. Yep, there you go. Okay. And you see this green haze here. I tend to remove that as well because when you mix the colors it looks a bit weird. So using the same ring principle, we add this, second layer, subtract, and then just mess with the expansion. Put it to -7 should be. Whoops. Alright, actually, ended up being -10. So here's your inner reticle for the smart link. And actually what I should have done before is just duplicate it. So then this is the smart link and this is the reticle. Now since you have these two masks, what I do for the smart link is I paste it there, except I invert them. Actually, what I should have done is this. Have this one on here, and then you invert that. So then for the smart link, you have this big hole where the reticle is going to be, which is right here. So this is just a way to sort of isolate the reticle. So then all you have to do is change the color of this one. And again, we can tint it to whatever color we want. So if you want red, this is really dark and ugly red, but it doesn't really go well with the green. I guess we can do like blue or something. Yeah, let's go with blue. There you go. So when your reticle passes over an enemy, you can sort of keyframe this color to sort of put it to red or whatever color when it's on the enemy, and then when it's not, you keyframe it out. So same principle for that. And that is essentially all I do for the smart link. It's a lot of masking and a lot of layer duplication. I mean, I guess I could simplify my process, but that's just the way I've always done it for now. So there you go. You finally have it. Smart link tutorial. If there's any other thing or effect that you want me to do, let me know, and I'll possibly do it in like a year or so or whenever I feel like doing it again.